Hi, welcome to another edition of STEAM Power, celebrating women in STEM, celebrating Black women in STEM. Today we have a young woman. Her name is Okorite Ephraim. She is 23. She just graduated, actually July 2019, and she's been working in contract research, organizing pro-pharmaceuticals projects as a qualified quality officer. Her job is to prevent mistakes as well as spotting them, and in the research of drug discovery. In her spare time, she loves reading, shopping, and drinking cocktails.
Yeah.
Welcome, Okorite. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. First of all, thank you for accepting our invitation. This is all about changing narratives and opening doors to diversity in STEM. So let me start by asking you what inspired you to become a scientist.
So with me, I have a lot of questions. I'm always asking why. And to be able to be one of the people who can answer the whys of my question is what inspired me to go into science.
Okay, so apart from the whys, was there any person or any event that actually said, look, I need to get on, I need to become a scientist in order to do this?
There wasn't a particular person, but for me, it was during school. So we'd be doing science lessons like biology, chemistry, physics. And I realized that a lot of the questions that I've been wanting to know for myself and being able to answer for myself, and the questions that generally people have, I was able to answer questions for people. So that's kind of like a push towards becoming a scientist.
Excellent. So what do you think are the attitudes towards women in the STEM world? How is
I
it for
think
you?
people automatically assume that you're geeky or a nerd, or all you do is like read science books, or all you do is science. I think that's the first thing that people think of when you think of a woman in STEM. They think that is what your life is. Your life is science, but it's really not. It's just a part of your life.
Hmm, hmm. And do you think, were you encouraged along the way to continue thriving for more during your career?
Yes, I think I've been pushed a lot, especially by my parents, to become the leader that I want to be in science. So, for example, it's not a case of like just riding along. I've always been pushed to discover more. So, one of the people who really pushed me actually was my dissertation supervisor. When I'd write something, she'd continue encouraging me to dig deeper and really figure out the reasons for these things. So, yeah.
Hmm, hmm. And so you mentioned your of this dissertation teacher tutor. What did you have a mentor after you finished your career? Because I was speaking to someone else that said to me that they never had any guidance going into the workforce. How was it like for you?
I would agree with that person actually, because after uni, like I'm still in touch with my dissertation supervisor, but I wouldn't say that I have that science mentor that I would like to find. I feel like it is harder once you leave university because I feel like there's nowhere to look if you want to find that person. If, for example, like my parents aren't in the field of science that I'm in, so it's not like I have their guidance to push me into it. But yeah, I agree with that person. It is harder when you leave uni to find a mentor in science.
All right, so there's definitely a gap in the market.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So how do you overcome that challenge then? How long did it take you before did you land your first work job?
So it took me about a year to land my first job in science. So my first job wasn't in science at all. And then I continued applying. I looked around for organizations in my city that specialized in different fields of science. Like for me, for example, I'm a scientist who doesn't enjoy the lab. So
Mhm.
it was finding a job that could incorporate what I like to do as well as actually still discovering more.
Mhm.
So I just continued looking. I researched a lot of roles within science because I knew that one thing I didn't want to do was work in a lab because I just don't enjoy it. So yeah, it's about use the facilities that you've got. So for me, it was the internet. I was on the internet quite a lot, researching exactly what role I wanted. And then when I discovered the role, then it started becoming about applying to those different companies that offered the role.
So now you just mentioned something that is really interesting, because as a scientist, when you become a scientist, I would have assumed that you just do what that basically there's only one description, one job description
Yeah,
within your career, but it turns out that you can actually choose what kind of within that you can niche a little bit
yeah,
more, which is really interesting, because sometimes when we think of also about science, it's a very rigid environment
yeah.
where you have
A lot
to
of people
do.
think that.
Yeah, so it's, thank you for that. I think you have educated us at least in that
That's one
sense.
thing I want people to know, that just because you want to work in science doesn't mean that you have to work in a lab. Like within my company, it's all scientists, but for example, the scientists who work in business development, who are trying to get clients for the the preclinical research that we do. They're scientists like me who work in quality. So, for example, I'm known as an independent scientist, so I'm not in the lab doing the experiments, but I watch the experiments and find out where they can be improved and what can be done to improve the experiments overall. And then there's the actual scientists in the lab who are conducting the experiments and things like that. So people, yeah, it's a good thing for people to know that just because you want to be a scientist doesn't mean that you're going to spend all your life in the lab. You can try different things as well.
Well, thank you. So I know that you are very young and probably you still have memories of school,
Yeah,
secondary school,
definitely.
primary school. So what do you think? Do you think that that schools here in the UK are actually promoting STEM education?
From because my secondary school was a science college, we had a lot of focus on our sciences. But I've spoken to people who had been like that, for them science wasn't that important because it wasn't something that was pushed really with them. So we had a lot of like science trips, like going to different places like based on science, which I think just made the subject a lot more interesting. But then there are some people who I speak to who think that it's just so boring and things like that. So I think
Mhm.
it just depends what school you go to and how they put it forward to you.
In the same subject, do you think that schools are preparing children for the world in terms of meeting its demands in terms of science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics?
I don't really think that there is that much of a push for science, especially nowadays. I feel like there's a push more for like business and things like that and finance. So I do think that schools could work a lot more into making science more appealing for kids at school. Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think, in your opinion, would make it more appealing?
I think it's showing that it's not just about sitting down and learning everything on a piece of paper. Like, for example, I did a microbiology degree, and one of our modules was microbial biotechnology, and our lecturer took us out to see practical and applied microbiology. So for what we were learning about the brewing process, like with yeast and things like that. So she took us to a brewery where we actually got to see it. So I think that one of those things, the thing with science is I feel like it seems so far away, it seems so distant, but one of the things they could do is make it applied. So if you're teaching about flowers, take them out to a field and show them the different parts of the flowers. Don't make them just sit and see it from a textbook, because a textbook isn't real life. So when you take the part of science you're learning about and take it further afield, make it applied into real life, I think that's when it gets more interesting, and it'll make you run, then you realize the use of it. Because a lot of people think, oh, what, like a lot of the things I heard at school was like, what's the point in learning this? But then when you show
I
them,
used to say that.
but yeah, when you show them, this is the point. We learn this so you can make this. Like, for example, we were learning about, one of the things I remember that stuck with me at school was, simple chocolates, the inside of it, keeping it runny when it's a runny chocolate. There's an enzyme that does that.
Oh.
So when we were learning about it, I remember my teacher, we learned the topic and then she brought the chocolates in. And since then, I think that was what, year 8, which I was, I think, about 12 years old. But that moment still, I'm 23 now, and that moment I still remember it. So it's about making the science practical and applying it to everyday life. I think that would really help.
Changing the subject a little bit, because I think that when it comes to careers and jobs in general, it's good to do personal development. And I've been asking many of the guests to share with us what are they reading. Are you reading anything? Can you recommend us
Um,
anything to read?
the book I'm reading is non-fiction, so I'm reading a book called Open Waters at the moment. That's by, because I'm trying to read a lot more Black authors, and that's by a Black author. I can't remember his name, but I
Mhm.
can send that to you afterwards. But
Mhm.
I'm reading a book called Open Waters, and it's just a non-fiction story basically for young adults, which is really, really interesting to read. And
Mhm.
I just finished reading a book called All About Love by Bell Hooks, and that's just a book about the different types of love, what makes people love, that kind of thing. It's quite a psychological book. So yeah, that's another area of science. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That many of us would like to master,
yeah.
the amount of single groups and platforms to, to match people up, and it's a whole
It's a
different.
really interesting book. I think everybody should read it.
Excellent. I will check it out. And lastly, what advice would you give to parents who see the potential in their children in terms of science but lack the resources?
I would say it's a case of speaking to their school. That would be a good thing to do because they can put them in touch with the teachers who would know a lot about it. And it'll be things like taking them to the local library, picking out some interesting science books, but books that won't make them feel like all they do is study. I think that's something that they should be wary of because obviously science does take a lot of revision and things like that to get the knowledge in. But if you see that your child has something special there, you don't want to overwork them to the point where they'll get bored of it. So I think it's about finding the interesting parts of it and showing them. And similar to my teacher, I think if they can do a bit of research on topics themselves and then show their child that area of how it can be applied, then that would be great because it's then showing them that it's a useful thing to learn and things like that. So yeah, I think making it more applied and just finding fun ways to increase it in their child's life without making it feel like they're being forced.
And with that wonderful advice, we are going to end the interview. This was Okorite Ephraim, microbiologist. And actually, I'm not going to try and say that the long name, but she has been wonderful having you. Those of you listening, you heard it. Scientists, being a scientist, not just about being in the lab.
Not
Many things that you can do. If you are a teacher, please bring science to life, make it practical, make it hands on. Thank you very much all for listening and see you on the next episode.